Arthur Finch was a man who saw the universe in terms of liability. To him, a supernova wasn't a stellar phenomenon. It was an uninsured, large-scale property damage event. A black hole wasn't a gravitational singularity. It was a perpetual hazard with an infinite risk profile. For 30 years, Arthur had been a senior risk assessment analyst for the Terran Interstellar Assurance Corporation, TIAC. His job was to calculate the precise, statistical probability of everything, from a micrometeorite striking a cargo hauler's port nacelle to a ship's cook accidentally giving an entire crew a bad case of food poisoning. He was, by every conceivable metric, the most boring man in the galaxy. This profoundly boring man was currently on a profoundly boring assignment, auditing the insurance premiums for a small, backwater human agricultural colony in the Proxima Centauri system called New Pangaea. The colony's primary export was a genetically engineered, nutrient-rich fungus known as Proxima bloom. It was a quiet, stable, and deeply unprofitable world. Arthur's job was to spend a month reviewing their safety protocols, calculating depreciation on their farming equipment, and ultimately raising their premiums by a standard, non-negotiable 3.2%. The current conflict in this sector of space was, to Arthur, a distant and professionally irritating variable. Two godlike hyper-advanced energy beings, known to the lesser races only as the Shapers and the Unravelers, were engaged in a slow, cosmic war. Their battles were things of unimaginable power, fought not with ships and weapons but by rewriting the laws of physics in localized areas. One day, gravity might temporarily reverse itself in a planetary system. The next, the strong nuclear force in a nebula might weaken, causing a chain reaction of brilliant, silent explosions. To the other species of the galaxy, this was a terrifying existential conflict, a war of gods happening in their celestial backyard. To Arthur Finch, it was a logistical nightmare. The Shaper-Unraveler conflict had introduced a massive number of unquantifiable risks into his actuarial tables. TIAC had been forced to create a new, galaxy-wide exclusion clause for all their policies, the Act of God Rider, which explicitly denied coverage for any and all damages resulting from reality-altering, non-standard, paracausal, or divine-level events. It was the broadest and most unchallengeable clause in the history of insurance. Arthur was in the middle of reviewing New Pangaea's combined harvester maintenance logs when the sky turned a gentle, terrifying shade of plaid. A Shaper and an Unraveler were having a disagreement in the upper atmosphere. The colony's orbital defense grid, a series of simple kinetic impact platforms, suddenly found its targeting software replaced with the rules for a primitive board game. One of the colony's primary fusion generators inexplicably transformed into a large, quivering gelatin mold, and a field of nearly harvested Proxima bloom, representing 90% of the colony's annual GDP, was transmuted into a field of perpetually screaming, vaguely sentient lawn gnomes. The colonists were in a panic. Their world, their livelihoods had been devastated by a casual cosmic, level act of vandalism. Once the plaid sky had returned to its normal, boring blue, the colonial governor, a harried-looking woman named Eva Rostova, immediately called her TIAC representative to file a claim. She was, of course, politely and firmly reminded of the Act of God clause. The damage was not covered. The colony was ruined. But the governor had not called the claims department. She had called the risk assessment analyst who happened to be on site. She had called Arthur Finch. Arthur, a man who hated unquantifiable risk more than anything in the universe, looked at the screaming lawn gnomes, at the gelatinous power plant, and at the profound, unbudgeted financial loss. This was not a claim to be denied. This was a risk that needed to be mitigated. At its source, Governor, Arthur said, his voice the dry, calm monotone of a man about to audit a spreadsheet, I believe it is time we had a talk with the responsible parties. Please prepare a full and itemized list of all damaged assets, and get me my legal team. Arthur Finch's legal team consisted of a single, terrifyingly competent junior actuary named Lena Petrova. Lena was a prodigy of probability, a young woman who could calculate the statistical odds of a politician telling the truth and express the answer in a frighteningly small number of decimal places. Her mind was a fortress of cold, hard data. Together, Arthur and Lena represented the pinnacle of humanity's most boring, and therefore most dangerous, superpower, its obsessive soul-crushing, and legally binding bureaucracy. While the colonists of New Pangaea were still reeling from their encounter with the divine, Arthur and Lena were working. They did not pray. They did not panic. They did paperwork. For 3 days they meticulously documented every single loss. The report was a masterpiece of mundane devastation. Item number 1. 1-1, Mark V fusion generator, asset tag 734, transmuted into 1.7 million cubic meters of non-potable raspberry-flavored gelatin. Estimated replacement cost 1.2 billion credits. Item number 2, 12 square kilometers of Proxima bloom, crop cycle 4. Estimated yield 8.9 million metric tons, transmuted into approximately 3.4 million sentient, audibly distressed ceramic gnomes. Estimated market value loss 3.7 billion credits. The final tally was staggering. The casual 5-minute spat between the two energy gods had caused 7.3 billion credits worth of damages. Now, Arthur said, reviewing the final beautiful spreadsheet of loss, we need to serve the claim. This was the first major hurdle. The Shapers and Unravelers were not members of the Galactic Compact. They had no known address, no registered agent. They were non-corporeal, godlike beings who reshaped reality for a living. One did not simply serve them papers. Their energy signatures are detectable, Lena pointed out, her fingers flying across a data slate. Their battles create predictable ripples in space-time. We can't send a process server, but we can broadcast the claim. We can attach it to a low-frequency neutrino burst. It's the legal equivalent of certified mail. And so from the colony's small underpowered comms dish, they sent the most audacious message in galactic history. It was a formal, legally drafted insurance claim, addressed to the Shaper entity and the Unraveler entity, detailing their shared liability in the New Pangaea incident and demanding full and immediate restitution of 7.3 billion credits. The message concluded with a standard, boilerplate threat. Failure to remit payment within 30 standard cycles will result in your case being referred to a collections agency. The rest of the galaxy, which monitored interstellar comms with great interest, was thrown into a state of profound disbelieving amusement. The humans were suing God. It was the funniest, most suicidally insane thing anyone had ever heard. The Vril conglomerate found it particularly hilarious. The Calthar Imperium declared it an act of profound blasphemy. No one expected a response. 10 days later, they got one. A single shimmering point of light, a being of pure golden energy, descended from the sky and hovered before the Colonial Administration building. It was a Shaper. It had come to answer the summons. The Shaper was a being of majestic, awe-inspiring beauty. Its voice was the sound of stars being born, a symphony of creation that resonated directly in the minds of all who heard it. Its very presence seemed to cause the air to hum with a creative, joyful energy. The colonists of New Pangaea fell to their knees in spontaneous, terrified worship. Arthur Finch and Lena Petrova did not. They walked out of the administration building carrying a data slate and a portable printer. "You have summoned me, mortals," the Shaper's voice boomed, a wave of pure, benevolent power. "I am the architect of worlds, the sculptor of suns. Why have you called me here with your tiny buzzing message?" Arthur Finch adjusted his spectacles. "Good morning. My name is Arthur Finch, representing the Terran Interstellar Assurance Corporation. Are you the Shaper entity listed as a party in claim number 734 Alpha?" The Shaper paused, a cosmic being experiencing the unfamiliar sensation of being addressed by a middle manager. "I am a Shaper. We are a plurality. The concept of individual designation is meaningless." "I see," Arthur said, making a note on his slate. "So you are, in fact, an unregistered, unincorporated collective entity. For legal purposes, I'll have to list you as Shapers et al. Now, regarding the incident of Cycle 284, in which your conflict with the entity known as the Unraveler resulted in significant property damage to our client, the New Pangaea colony." The Shaper's light seemed to flicker with confusion. "The great work is not a conflict. It is the act of creation and uncreation. The Unraveler unmakes. I make. It is the way of the universe. Your tiny world was caught in the process. It is of no consequence." "I'm afraid that's where you're mistaken," Lena Petrova interjected, her voice sharp and clear. "According to Galactic Compact precedent, which we are using as a guiding framework in this non-binding arbitration. Any collateral damage resulting from a conflict between two or more parties is the shared legal responsibility of all belligerents. While your great work may be of cosmic importance to you, in this jurisdiction it is classified as a reckless endangerment event. The 7.3 billion credit liability is joint and several. The shaper was silent. The concepts of liability, jurisdiction, and joint and several were not in its cosmic vocabulary. It was like trying to explain calculus to a rock. Your words are meaningless, the shaper finally boomed. I can unmake you with a thought. I can turn your son into a bouquet of flowers. Your claims are less than dust to me. That may be, Arthur said calmly, and such an action would be classified as a clear case of witness intimidation and a retaliatory act against a claimant, which would, according to our projections, result in a significant punitive damages multiplier. We would have to amend our claim to ask for treble damages. That's 21.9 billion credits. And we would, of course, have to report your non-compliance to the credit rating agencies. The shaper, a being that could wrestle with the fundamental forces of the universe, had no idea what a credit rating agency was, but Arthur's tone of voice made it sound deeply, profoundly threatening. It had come here expecting to be worshipped or feared. Instead, it was being audited. Frustrated and confused by these strange, persistent mortals, the shaper did something it had not done in a million years. It called its opponent. A second being appeared in the sky, this one a vortex of shimmering, beautiful entropy, a creature of pure, elegant unmaking. The Unraveler. Why have you paused the great work, shaper? The Unraveler's voice whispered, a sound like rustling leaves and crumbling stone. These things, the shaper projected, gesturing its light toward Arthur and Lena. They are attempting to apply a concept they call financial liability to our existence. The Unraveler turned its entropic gaze upon the two humans. Arthur Finch did not flinch. He simply cleared his throat. Good morning. My name is Arthur Finch. Am I to understand you are the party of the second part, hereafter referred to as the Unraveler, in claim number 734 Alpha? The two cosmic entities were now utterly baffled. They had been engaged in their eternal celestial dance of creation and destruction for eons. No lesser species had ever dared to do anything but hide and prey. Now two small, soft creatures were standing in front of them, accusing them of what amounted to a cosmic hit and run. As we have explained to your co-belligerent, Lena said, addressing the vortex of nothingness, you are jointly responsible for 7.3 billion credits in damages. However, our analysis of the event shows that your actions, the transmutation of the power generator specifically, were responsible for approximately 62% of the total financial loss. We have therefore apportioned the liability accordingly. Your share of the damages comes to 4.526 billion credits. The shaper is liable for the remaining 2.774 billion. A flicker of something new entered the exchange. The Unraveler, a being of pure entropy, felt a spark of what a human would call indignation. You claim I am more responsible than the shaper? His actions are garish and uncontrolled. My work is precise, elegant, my work is creation. The shaper boomed back. You are mere destruction. It is your entropic nature that causes these accidents. The two gods began to bicker. Arthur and Lena had done the impossible. They had taken a conflict of abstract cosmic principles and turned it into a petty squabble over who was more at fault for a fender bender. They had reframed the entire war in the one language that, it turned out, was truly universal: blame. If you cannot agree on the apportionment of damages, Arthur said, interrupting the divine argument, you will have to settle this in formal arbitration. We will, of course, have to charge you both for our billable hours. My current rate is 4,000 credits per hour. My associate is 2,500. The two cosmic beings stopped their bickering and turned their full, unified attention back to the humans. The sheer, audacious mundanity of it all was a force more powerful than anything they had ever encountered. They could unwrite the laws of physics, but they had no counter for billable hours. This is absurd, the shaper and the Unraveler projected in perfect, frustrated unison. What do you want from us? Arthur Finch pushed his glasses up his nose. We want you to pay for the damages. And then, he said, pulling a new data slate from his briefcase, We would like to talk to you about purchasing a comprehensive liability insurance policy. The two most powerful beings in the known universe floated in the sky above New Pangaea, locked in a state of profound and unprecedented confusion. The Shaper, a being of incandescent creation, and the Unraveler, a vortex of elegant entropy, had been brought to a total standstill by the sheer, unassailable logic of human bureaucracy. They could not fight each other, as any collateral damage would apparently increase their liability. They could not destroy the two small, soft creatures demanding payment, as this was something called retaliation and would incur punitive damages. They were trapped. Arthur Finch, sensing a pivotal moment in the negotiation, had a colonist bring him a simple, uncomfortable-looking chair and a small table. He sat down, placed his data slate on the table, and looked up at the two gods. "Now," he said, his voice the epitome of calm reason, "let's discuss the terms of a policy." He began to explain the concept of insurance. He used simple, powerful metaphors that even a cosmic entity could understand. "Your great work," he explained, "is what we in the industry would classify as a high-risk ongoing enterprise, like a construction project but with physics. An insurance policy does not stop accidents from happening. It simply quantifies the risk beforehand and creates a stable, predictable financial framework for mitigating the cost of those accidents." The Shaper pulsed with a golden light. "You wish for us to pay you, in case we accidentally create a field of screaming gnomes?" "Precisely," Arthur said with a nod. "Think of it as prepaid risk amortization. You pay a small regular premium to us, Tiak. In exchange, we assume the financial liability for any unintended property damage. We handle the claims, the paperwork, the legal challenges. We become the administrative buffer between your great work and the fragile, litigious lesser races of the galaxy. You would be free to create and unmake, secure in the knowledge that your potential liabilities are covered." The Unraveler's form swirled, a vortex of contemplative silence. "This seems inefficient, a diversion of effort." "On the contrary," Lena Petrova interjected, stepping forward with her own data slate, "it is the pinnacle of efficiency. We have calculated the average rate of your reality-altering events in this sector over the last millennium. We have cross-referenced this with the total asset value of all inhabited systems within the affected zones. Based on these projections, we can offer you a comprehensive liability policy for a quarterly premium that represents a mere 0.001% of the potential damages you could cause in any given cycle. It is the most logical, cost-effective solution." The two gods began to bicker again, but this time it was different. The Shaper argued that the Unraveler, being a force of destruction, should have a higher risk profile and therefore pay a larger share of the premium. The Unraveler countered that the Shaper's creations were often unstable and gaudy, posing a long-term latent risk that was far harder to quantify. Arthur and Lena listened patiently, occasionally interjecting with a calming, data-driven clarification about risk pools and deductibles. The War of Gods had become a debate over insurance premiums. After a full day of negotiations, a deal was struck. The Shaper and the Unraveler, with a sense of profound cosmic weariness, agreed to the policy. This led to the second, even more complex problem: payment. Neither entity possessed a single credit. Their currency was the universe itself. "This is a simple logistical hurdle," Arthur explained, unfazed. "Teak is fully equipped to accept payment in the form of services rendered or assets created. We have already calculated your initial premium, which also covers the 7.3 billion credits in damages owed to the New Pangaea colony." He presented them with a work order. It was a legally binding addendum to the insurance policy to cover its 4.526 billion credit share. The Unraveler was tasked with the complete and total annihilation of the nearby Oort Cloud asteroid belt, a notorious navigational hazard that cost the shipping industry millions in damages and delays each year. To cover its 2.774 billion credit share, the Shaper was tasked with the full terraforming of New Pangaea's barren, lifeless moon, transforming it into a Class M world rich in rare earth minerals. The two gods accepted their tasks with a sense of grim resignation. For the next week, the colonists of New Pangaea and the wider galaxy watched a spectacle of creation and destruction so mundane it was almost comical. The Unraveler drifted over to the asteroid belt and, with a great cosmic sigh of entropy, simply unmade it. The rocks did not explode. They just quietly and elegantly ceased to exist, one by one, until the entire belt was gone, Shipping lanes were cleared, and TIAC immediately billed the Galactic Shipping Guild a hefty navigational hazard removal fee. The Shaper, meanwhile, approached the barren moon with the enthusiasm of a sulking artist forced to paint a commercial mural. It grumpily sculpted majestic mountain ranges, carved winding river valleys, and seeded the new world with shimmering crystalline forests that were rich in the very minerals the policy had specified. When it was finished, the moon was a paradise, a real estate asset of incalculable value. TIAC immediately took possession of the moon, classified it as a corporate holding, and began selling mining and development rights. The colony of New Pangaea was paid its damages in full. TIAC, having taken on a $7.3 billion credit liability, had not spent a single credit. Instead, it had acquired a new, resource-rich planetoid and a permanent revenue stream from the galaxy's safest shipping lanes. It was the most profitable insurance claim in history. The Divine Accord, as the policy was officially named, had a profound and immediate effect on the galaxy. The great work continued, but it was now, considerali. The Shaper and the Unraveler, now deeply and personally concerned about their deductible, began to conduct their cosmic battles in empty, uninhabited star systems. They would check TIAC's galactic risk assessment maps before engaging in any reality-altering activities. Their eternal, glorious war had been utterly neutered by paperwork. It was then that the Viral conglomerate saw an opportunity. The Viral, a species of predatory capitalists, saw the Divine Accord not as a peace treaty, but as a new revenue stream. They intentionally established a new high-tech mining operation on a small, worthless moon in a sector that was clearly marked on TIAC's maps as a zone of high paracausal activity. The station was built quickly and cheaply, using substandard materials. It was a setup. It was insurance fraud on a cosmic scale. 3 months later, a Shaper Unraveler skirmish swept through the zone. The Viral mining station, as predicted, was hit. It was not unmade or turned into gnomes. In a moment of particularly whimsical creation, the Shaper's influence transformed the entire station and its crew into a single colossal and perfectly cooked soufflé. The Viral immediately filed a claim with TIC for 10 billion credits, the supposed value of their state-of-the-art facility. As the administrators of the Divine Accord, it was Arthur and Lena's job to investigate. "This feels wrong," Arthur mused, looking over the claim. The risk was clearly documented. No sane entity would build there. Lena Petrova, the data prodigy, was already deep inside the Viral's corporate records, which she had obtained through a simple, polite, but legally unavoidable request for documentation. "It's more than wrong, Arthur," she said, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "It's fraudulent." She projected her findings. The Viral had insured the station for twice its actual construction cost. They had used materials rated far below the standard for a zone of high activity, and, most damningly of all, she had found an internal memo from a Viral risk assessor, explicitly warning the board that building in that sector was statistically indistinguishable from placing the asset directly into a garbage disposal. The claim was a sham. Arthur and Lena prepared their response. The Viral's 10 billion credit claim was officially and summarily denied on the grounds of gross contributory negligence and malicious forethought. The Viral conglomerate was furious. Being denied a fraudulent claim was one thing. Being accused of it publicly was an insult to their entire culture. They threatened to sue TIAC, to challenge the Divine Accord, to bring the full weight of their own considerable legal power to bear. This led to a conference call of almost unimaginable absurdity. A 4-way holographic meeting between Arthur Finch, Lena Petrova, the golden, radiant form of the Shaper, and the swirling, entropic vortex of the Unraveler. They tried to cheat us? The Shaper boomed, its light flaring with righteous anger once Arthur had explained the concept of insurance fraud. Our sacred work, our very existence used as a pretext for petty theft? The Unraveler was, if anything, even more insulted. My elegant, purposeful unmaking, conscripted into a scheme of crass profit? The dishonor is incalculable. The two gods, who had been enemies for eons, were now united in a shared, burning indignation. They had been scammed. There is a solution, Arthur said calmly, sensing the moment. We simply need to amend the policy. I propose a new addendum, the moral hazard rider. It will state that the policy does not cover damages incurred by any party that has not taken reasonable and prudent steps to mitigate foreseeable risks. In short, if you build your house in a lava flow, you don't get to complain when it melts. The two gods agreed instantly and with furious intensity, but then they did something no one expected. They were the policyholders, but they were also the very forces of nature the policy was meant to protect against. They decided to enforce the rider themselves. A new, quiet, and terrifying form of order began to settle over the galaxy. A shipping freighter, trying to save time by cutting through a notoriously dangerous nebula without upgrading its shields, suddenly found its cargo of luxury goods spontaneously transformed into live, angry badgers. A mining colony that ignored geological warnings and built its primary settlement on an active fault line woke up one morning to find their entire city had been elegantly and precisely unmade, leaving only a perfectly smooth patch of bedrock. The galaxy learned a new, profound truth. The gods were still at war, but their conflict had been sublimated. They were no longer just the shaper and the unraveler. They were now the universe's ultimate and most terrifyingly direct insurance adjusters. They were enforcing a universal standard of safety, logic, and responsibility, not with laws, but with the immediate and undeniable consequences of their own divine power. Arthur and Lena had not just managed risk. They had weaponized it, and in doing so had accidentally made the galaxy a much, much safer place to live. The era following the signing of the Divine Accord was later known as the Great Prudence. The moral hazard rider, enforced with the terrifying dispassionate efficiency of the cosmos's two most powerful beings, had a more profound effect on galactic civilization than 1,000 years of law and philosophy. Safety, once a secondary concern to profit and expansion, became the single most important metric for any sentient enterprise. Shipyards began producing vessels with triple redundant shielding and reinforced hulls, not because of new regulations, but because insurance premiums for anything less were astronomical. Colonial charters were now written by geologists and astrophysicists, not just politicians, ensuring that no settlement was ever again built on a planet with a foreseeable risk of spontaneous gnome transmutation. The galaxy, for the first time in its history, became a place where looking both ways before crossing a shipping lane was a law of physics. At the heart of this new, depressingly safe galaxy was the Terran Interstellar Assurance Corporation. Arthur Finch's quiet, overlooked paracausal risk division was now the most powerful and influential body in the Galactic Compact. Aliens from across the stars sent their brightest minds to Earth to study the sacred arcane texts of actuarial science. The ability to create a well-formed spreadsheet became a more prized skill than commanding a battle fleet. Arthur and Lena found themselves the reluctant high priests of a new galactic religion, one of quantitative risk analysis and prudent asset management. The virile conglomerate, however, did not adapt. Their entire culture was predicated on a philosophy of aggressive, high-risk capitalism. In a galaxy that now punished recklessness, their business model was obsolete. Their profits plummeted. Their ventures failed. They were a species of apex predators who had woken up one morning to find the universe had evolved beyond the need for teeth. Humiliated and furious, they decided that if they could not defeat the new system, they would destroy its architects. The Vrl's attack was not a military strike, but an act of insidious personal warfare. They couldn't sue TIS, which was now inextricably linked to the will of the gods themselves, so they did something no one in the civilized galaxy had ever thought to do. They filed a personal injury lawsuit against Arthur Finch and Lena Petrova. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of malicious, human-style litigation, drafted by a new generation of Vrl lawyers who had studied Earth's most famously frivolous cases. The plaintiffs were a group of virile tourists who had been visiting the new Pangea system during the initial incident. The claim was not for property damage, but for severe and ongoing emotional, psychological, and existential distress. Their argument was as brilliant as it was infuriating. They claimed that by engaging with and ensuring the Shaper and the Unraveler, Arthur and Lena had personally assumed a duty of care to the rest of the galaxy. The incident with the plaid sky and the screaming gnomes, they argued, had inflicted a deep cultural trauma upon the Vrl tourists, causing them to question the very nature of their reality. They were suing Arthur and Lena for negligent administration of a divine entity, seeking trillions of credits in damages for their collective mental anguish. The lawsuit was a phantom, an attack made of pure bureaucracy. It had no legal merit, but its purpose was not to win. Its purpose was to harass, to entangle Arthur and Lena in a decade of personal, stressful, and financially draining legal battles. It was an attempt to remove them from the board by drowning them in paperwork. For the first time in his life, Arthur Finch, a man who had quantified the risk of a son going nova, was faced with a risk he couldn't put on a spreadsheet, a direct personal attack on his own peace of mind. The case of Verl claimants versus Finch and Petrova went to a special arbitration, presided over by the concordant arbiter. The Shaper and the Unraveler were called as the star witnesses. The Verl's new lawyer, a slick, fast-talking prodigy named Cathar, was relentless. Shaper entity, Cathar's translated voice purred. Can you state for the record that your actions are, and always will be, completely predictable and 100% safe for all mortal beings? The Shaper, a being of infinite chaotic creation, pulsed with confused light. Of course not. The great work is creation. It is inherently unpredictable, and you, Unraveler, Cathar pressed. Can you guarantee that your process of unmaking will never cause, let's say, existential distress to those who witness it? The Unraveler, a being of pure entropy, whispered a simple, honest truth. All things cause distress. It is the prelude to the void. Cathar turned to the arbiter, its claws spread in a gesture of triumph. There you have it. The defendants have bound themselves to two entities who admit they are unpredictable and distressing. They have failed in their duty of care. They are negligent. They are liable. The argument was strong. The gods themselves had admitted they were a hazard. But then Arthur Finch, looking tired, rumpled, and deeply annoyed, took the stand. He did not address the Verl lawyer. He addressed the arbiter. The plaintiff's entire case, Arthur began, his voice a dry monotone, is based on a fundamentally flawed premise. They are arguing that they have a right to a universe with zero risk. Such a universe does not and cannot exist. Life itself is a statistically significant risk factor for eventual death. He adjusted his glasses. We at TAC do not sell safety. We do not sell certainty. We sell a rational mathematical system for managing the consequences of a universe that is, and always will be, inherently unsafe and uncertain. The Verl are not suing us because they were harmed. They are suing us because they are angry that the universe does not conform to their desire for predictable profit. Their claim is not a legal argument. It is a philosophical tantrum, and it is a waste of this court's valuable time. Arthur's simple, devastating logic cut through the Verl's complex legal maneuvering. The arbiter, a being of pure reason, could not refute his core point. The lawsuit was dismissed as being without merit and philosophically frivolous, but the story did not end there. The Shaper and the Unraveler had been listening. They had just been introduced to two final, profoundly human concepts: frivolous lawsuits and malicious litigation. And they were deeply cosmically offended. They saw it as the ultimate form of moral hazard, using the very system of reason and justice as a weapon of bad faith. They decided, in consultation with their risk manager, Arthur Finch, to issue one final ultimate rider to the divine accord. They appeared before the full galactic concordate. In a joint unified projection that stunned the galaxy into silence, they issued their decree. Any entity, be it corporate, individual, or governmental, that was found to have filed a claim or a lawsuit that was frivolous, malicious, or brought in bad faith would be found in direct violation of the accord. The punishment was simple, elegant, and perfectly tailored to their divine natures. The Unraveler would permanently unmake that entity's legal and corporate standing, erasing it from all official records. The Shaper would then reshape all of that entity's forfeited assets into a charitable trust, to be paid out to the victims of its frivolous litigation. It was a divine death penalty for corporate malfeasance. With that single act, the two gods became the ultimate arbiters of good faith negotiation in the galaxy. They had become the Supreme Court, and their rulings were absolute. The story ends with Arthur Finch and Lena Petrova back in their quiet, boring office at TIAC headquarters. The galaxy outside is safer, more responsible, and more rationally managed than ever before. Their work was for the most part done. Lena was reviewing the final claim from the Verl conglomerate, which no longer existed. The newly formed Verl Charitable Trust for the Emotionally Distressed had just paid out its first dividend. Arthur looked over a new set of actuarial tables. The statistical probability of a hostile corporate takeover had dropped to 0. The odds of a frivolous lawsuit were now statistically indistinguishable from the odds of a star turning into a bouquet of flowers. It was a risk assessor's paradise. He allowed himself a small, quiet, and statistically significant smile. Humanity, armed with nothing but spreadsheets, paperwork, and the unassailable logic of a well-drafted insurance policy, had not just survived a war of gods. They had civilized them.